Welcome. I'm Mark Anthony. This is the Psychic in the Doc, and I'm here with my amazing and incredible co-host, the one, the only, Dr. Pat Baccili, the street smart spiritual behavioral psychologist and the founder of the Transformation Network, which brings you not only this show, but also the Dr. Pat Show and many other shows. So please check out the website, transformationtalkradio.com. And we have a really fascinating show tonight. And before we get started, today is a very auspicious day. On January 7th of 1945, Russian troops liberated Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. And today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. And we have to keep in mind that between 1933 and 1945, 11 million people, that's the estimate, were murdered in Nazi concentration camps. 6 million of those people were Jewish, and then 5 million other enemies of the state, which included anyone who would crack a political comment about Der Fuhrer. Gypsies, hundreds of thousands of gypsies were murdered. LGBT members were rounded up and exterminated, along with millions of Poles, Russians, Ukrainians, Czechs, Croats. So it's important that we take a moment and remember the sacrifices of these people who were exterminated simply because of who or what they were. So, we'll take a moment to just honor these people.
Yeah. So,
Dr. Pat, we have quite an incredible guest tonight, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun. I've had the pleasure of knowing our guest, Jim Bruton, for a couple of years now, and he's a journalist, a TV producer, adventurer, and author. He won an Emmy for his work on National Geographic Television. And Jim is a Renaissance guy. He invented the satellite video phone, which enables TV production from remote areas which were previously inaccessible before. And then he not only invented that, but he refined it for uses in telemedicine. So Jim has been a guest lecturer at Yale University School of Medicine, and he integrated biometrics destined for the ISS, the International Space Station, and the testing, and he was testing them 2 years in a row with climbers on Mount Everest. So Jim's adventures have taken him to all 7 continents. He was reporting on the discovery of the Titanic, and I hope he talks about that a bit because that's always fascinating. He's been to the North Pole, Mount Everest, and he's been a war correspondent and been to many war zones around the world. But perhaps Jim's greatest adventure was not of this world, but the other side. And Jim is a near-death experiencer, which means he died and lived to tell about it. Yeah. So I'd like to welcome to the Psychic in the Doc, Jim Bruton. Jim, thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Dr. Pat. How are you tonight?
I just got one burning question for you.
Okay.
So seriously important.
All right.
I don't think I can ask you any other questions till I get an answer to this question. Is that you on a Fat Boy?
Yes.
Is that you on a Harley Davidson Fat Boy?
It is.
For real?
You nailed it.
We're going to be friends for life.
There you go.
That's it. That was my big burning question.
All right. Show's over.
Thank you for everyone for tuning in to the Psychic in the Doc. Good night.
See you next week.
I'm sorry. I grew up in a motorcycle family. My dad we had 3 girls, and our nails stayed black until we were 16 years old.
I love it.
Dad used to build these things. He built one of the first trikes. So I can spot a Harley like 50 miles away, but I wasn't sure if that was a Fat Boy. I couldn't tell.
It was. You really got it. That's very good. You still got
Go
it.
ahead, Mark. Now you talk about the other things.
I'm all right. So Jim, the fat boy, the Harley, is it
Yeah, right.
is it strictly for pleasure, or when you're on any of your assignments, have you ever been riding a Harley?
Oh,
It was definitely for pleasure, but it'd be great to integrate that into some work, wouldn't it?
you got to
really
do it.
would.
I'm
I would
actually
like it.
thinking about it myself. I'm actually thinking about it. I mean, I got 2 new knees. And the thing that I miss both, the worst of everything, is getting on a bike.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where when I had to sell my chopped out 1970 Sportster, there was more chrome on that than in Crazy K's teeth. And it was like I lost a part of me. But that's what we're really talking about today, because, part of what we go through in life, we go through these changes, we go through these transitions. I'm not even going to ask you if you still have Fat Boy, but we go through changes as Mark, you just so beautifully described. And the message I'm getting right now is that our biggest losses can create our biggest blessings. And if somebody would have said that while I was in the middle of a loss, I probably would have decked them.
Mm.
But somehow we get to reflect on our lives and reflect on what's been your guiding post, so to speak, right? Right, Mark?
Absolutely. And Dr. Pat, that's a good point. And, in loss, there is gain, as in gain, there is loss. And Jim, certainly we're going to talk about your NDE. So let's talk about that now, if we could. And then we'll go back and talk about some of your other cool adventures.
Sure.
Now, my understanding is that your NDE had nothing to do with the Harley Davidson, right?
No, it did not. It might have gone better. I'm not sure. Crashing a plane, early crash. I don't know.
Oh my God. I was going to feel so awful, actually, if it did, but go ahead.
No, I did that for Dr. Pat's benefit.
Thank you.
But Jim, if you could understand that among your many talents, you're a pilot. And is that part of what led you into the situation that led to the NDE?
Yeah, I guess you could say I took off in one world and landed in another. Twilight
Wow.
Zone. Yeah, but honestly, to sort of put it in context, my life itself is one of, as you just alluded to, with all the things I've done. Calling me a Renaissance man is like saying I can't make up my mind what I want to be when I grow up. And when I was a kid, I had a very active imagination. I would sit there in the 1960s looking at popular mechanics. When are we going to get the flying saucer in the garage, or the jetpack that fly, or when are we going to the moon as tourists in the year 2000? I was also interested in inventing things, and like I said, with science fiction, it's the infinite worlds of maybe. It's a future of possibilities, and I was also interested in wildlife programs like Wild Kingdom. And then I was also interested in old airplanes. My dad learned to fly when I was in the first grade. So in the 60s, a couple of cool movies came out, Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines, about a 1910 air race to France, and then the Blue Max, which was World War I. And I just fell in love with that age of aviation because the aircraft were so beautiful. So fast forward, as we unfold the years, I went from watching TV to making it. I lived in Africa off and on for 14 years. And as you said, worked with National Geographic, and my work was recognized with an Emmy. And then it was out there that Disney came to scout a location, had a satellite phone. And I realized, wow, I can probably figure out a way to push video over this. And I was the first person in the world to do that. And then, like I say, we further modified it for use in telemedicine, had more adventures. And eventually that led down the path to becoming a war correspondent for NBC News. So that was just an example. But later on, I decided to retire from the war business and thought, well, I need to do something with all this adrenaline. So I think I'll go build these airplanes I was fascinated with since I was a child. The first plane I built was a 1917 Fokker triplane, just like the Red Baron flew, but in my own paint scheme, it wasn't red. And that flew beautifully, and it's still flying with an original World War I engine in it. And
Wow.
then I said, now that I've done the macho airplane, I can build the whimsical Disney looking airplane.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. I hear an NDE in your future.
Yeah, had a very un-Disney-like experience, I think. But what happened is it kind of looked like a soapbox derby car with a wing right behind my head, one above my head, a big BMW motorcycle engine right in front of my face, swinging almost a 6-foot prop. And this was the second test flight on October 6, 2016. And while I was flying, I lost my engine. It just stopped. And luckily, I don't panic. So I just calmly worked on getting it started again, and I did. And then it stopped again. And where I live in Connecticut, there were a lot of, this was a grass field, grass airstrip, and around it were just a lot of hills, a lot of forests, and not a lot of great places to put down. So I aimed for a small lake in a Boy Scout camp that was adjacent to the airfield, because the front of the aircraft, the fuselage, was curved up like a boat. So I thought, all right, I'll just sink it into the water. It's open cockpit. I'll pop the belt. I'm out. Well, it didn't really work out like that, because as I came down, I came into ground effect, which actually slows your descent rate and extends your glide. So I cleared the bank. And again, remember, in the equivalent of a soapbox derby car, I crashed into all these tree trunks at about 70 miles an hour.
Whoa.
Yeah, the plane just turned into matchsticks. Basically, when I stopped crashing, there was no plane left around me. I ruptured both lungs, broke all my ribs, my right leg had multiple fractures. Other than that, I was fine, but that was not a good
Other
way
than
to-
that, you're fine.
Exactly.
So when that happened, do you know when the NDE occurred? Did it occur at that time? Because it was at that time, because I know that you had to have been in the hospital for an extended period of time with injuries like that.
Well, here's what happened. Luckily, there was a man fishing there because the park was normally closed, and he liked the peace and quiet. And then, of course, I went and ruined all that. But he ran over and called 911, kept me propped up, because again, I had no lungs to really breathe with.
Yeah,
So I was
wow.
kind of gasping for air. It was pretty touch and go. But the helicopter came in about 30 or 45 minutes later. It wasn't too hard to pull me out of the wreck, because there wasn't much of a wreck to be pulled out of. And they flew me up to the Hartford, Connecticut Trauma Center, and they were waiting for me. They just incredible. But I really don't have much of a memory of this. I just sort of pieced it together or asked people about it. So a couple hours later, when my family finally got there, I was in a breathing machine. I was intubated, had all kinds of tubes coming in and going out of me. I had already escaped from the restraints once, and they re-restrained me. And they said, listen, we've got multiple days of 6+ hour operations coming up, and we could lose them at any time. Some of these operations only have a 2% chance of success, and we should just put him into a coma. And they said, yeah, that's fine. Make it easy on everyone. So again, without any real clear memory, I'm just sort of doing the math. And my assumption is that when they put me into a coma here, that's when my near-death experience occurred. And I was out for a week. How long was my NDE? Who can say, because we all know how time flows differently there, but I'm willing to say, I was there for a week. I don't know, maybe it was a split second. But what's interesting is that when I came out of the coma a week later, it was clearly another week, because they transferred me to another hospital. It was another week before I really had a functioning mind and memory and all that. So it was interesting. While I was sitting in the hospital, when I got my laptop delivered to me so I could, look at things other than the TV, I looked at my emails, and I said, the last email I can remember looking at here was 2 days before my crash. So it's interesting that this moment of super lucidity, an NDE, is bookended with 2 periods of amnesia.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Pat. Yeah.
I love that you're talking about that, because the reason that Mark and I do this, and this is Mark's wheelhouse. For me, I'm the person that had an experience, and everybody thought I was crazy, and I ended up in a therapist's office.
Wow.
Because what you just described, they don't want to hear that. When you're talking, so you're sitting there, and the next thing you know, you're in an ambulance. Then the next thing you know, you've got 15 different tests, and they're asking you questions that you cannot answer intelligently. So if you're the average normal person, you make stuff up just to get them off your back, right? I
Right.
mean, think about it.
Sure.
You wouldn't really sit there to a neurologist and say, I was sitting at my computer. I don't remember how I dialed the phone. And then I was in an ambulance, but then I don't remember that. And then I was in the hospital. They think you've lost it, when in fact, you may have found it.
It's true. It's like they ask you questions that are multiple choice questions, and we give them an essay, and they're just not, where do they fit that in? You know, it just doesn't fit into any category. So you're ruining our day. Let's just make short change of this.
Now, Jim, I know that you've written 2 books about your near-death experience. The first one is The In Between, The Trip of a Lifetime. In your most recent book, The Practice in Between, The Art of Letting Go.
Letting go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is your NDE is not the typical, I went through a tunnel into the light, like the NDE I had as a child and the vast majority. Your NDE was different. Can you tell us what your near-death experience was?
Yeah, I want you to share this, because I think a lot of people will be breathing a fresh breath of air and understanding. Anybody that's read the book, I've read your book, and will understand they're not alone.
True. Well, like you say, my life was pretty unusual. So why stop with an NDE, right?
Yeah, why should you have a typical NDE, right?
Yeah, why have a normal near-death experience? Right. I mean, let's have a 1 in a million experience within an already 1 in a million population. So yeah, what's interesting is, well, first of all, kind of working it backwards for a moment. When I came home and thought, I know I've had something important happen. And at that time, I was familiar with an out-of-body experience. And I wasn't quite sure, did I go to purgatory, simply because that picture behind me is where I went and what it looked like.
Yeah.
And that's not very, rainbows and unicorns, if you will. I didn't go through a tunnel, didn't see anyone else there, not to speak of deceased loved ones. Didn't see any angelic beings.
Mm-hmm.
I would say I had, in a very different way, something that was perhaps a more functional version of a life review. And then, everybody gets a big message. I got 2 sentences and I got kicked out. But there was more to the conversation than that. And so what happened was, basically, I teleported, if you will. It was like I just appeared on a terrace of a very tall building in this post-apocalyptic landscape. Like say, if you imagine whatever big city you live near or in, 1,000 years after the nuclear blast or the meteor hit or whatever. And I mean, just absolute devastation. So I looked around and saw that, and above me were these heavy, heavy clouds, just like the mother of all storms was going to cut loose. And I wasn't afraid or anything. I'm just taking it in. And we could talk more about how many times we hear about, you have the active mind and then you have the observer mind. This was all observer. And I felt very depersonalized, and that became more apparent later on. So I just remember looking around, taking it all in. And then this wave of nausea passed through me. And I remember sort of like bending around, thought, I don't think I can stand this. And when I said that, just over to my left, I heard this like light whispering of clacking gears. Is the only way I can really explain it. When I looked over, I saw this large egg-shaped structure made out of open lattice work. I would say it was about 4 stories high, about 50 feet high. And I said, I don't know, but I just sort of felt like that thing and I are somehow connected. So I made my way over to it. And as I looked through the open lattice work, I could see all of these gears just freely suspended in the air. And they're a special type of gear. When we think of a gear, we normally think of a circle with little teeth all the way around it.
Right.
This was a sector gear. And I didn't even know what it was called. I had to look up, what is this called? And a sector gear is a partial arc of a gear, and it's meant to move back and forth. So it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's significant because of what they represented. So as I looked at them, some were very definite and in focus. Some were very ghost-like, and they would just pass through each other. And they were like idling. You know, it was like they were just kind of moving around and idling, not really with seeming purpose at the moment. Probably because what I'm about to say. And what's interesting, I put my hand through there to see if I could touch them, because again, the definite ones I was pretty sure I could, but I wondered, could I feel the ones that were more ghost-like? At some point, one brushed by my hand. And when it did, immediate intense nausea all over again.
Wow.
And with a reflex, I grabbed it, pulled it out, and threw it away. Don't know why I thought I could do that. But when I did, all of the gears started spinning around. And I remember saying, gosh, you know, what's going on? And then this disembodied voice came, and it stayed with me throughout the entire experience. And it said, this is the future birthing into the now. This is, you know, this is the art. This is what it is becoming. You know, this is what becoming is. And I said, what are all these gears? And they said, they are all the probabilities in your future. And I said, why do some cause me pain? And it said, basically it was saying the ones that caused me pain were choices I would be able to make in the future that would be to my spiritual detriment. And it was like I was feeling the pain of making those decisions now as a measure of whether I would ever really want to choose them or not.
Do you, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm interrupting. So each of these components, each of these gears are different probabilities. Did it seem like these were predestined events, or that you had some form of self-determination, free will, or do you know?
Well, you know, when I would say what it is, and I've heard you talk about quantum physics. So, you know, I'm into quantum physics.
Yeah.
And that we're talking about superposition probabilities. And let's face it, based on our bias, our fears, our willingness to be open, the number of superposition probabilities we see at any moment that make different choices available to us are different for everyone, right? The more, I would say, the more binary thinking you are, the fewer possibilities you see in any situation.
Yeah.
Because it needs to be this or that. I need to be a winner or I'm going to be a loser. It's us or them. I'm vaccinated or I'm unvaccinated. I'm Democrat or Republican, you know, something like that, right? But again, you know, I was told I was in the in-between, and I got to see what that really meant. But I think the less dual-minded we are, and the more we're comfortable with the ambiguity in the shades of gray between the polar definite opposites, every one of those shades of gray are a manifold of a different reality represented by many more probabilities that are really there. We just have to be open to seeing them. And I, you know, and I said at one point, you know, I feel bad that pain is my only guide here. I don't have a better moral compass to choose which potentially bad choices in my future to remove. I was being given the chance to basically stack the deck and to remove rocks, if you will, in my future path. So it said to me, though, that that, you know, all choices have unintended consequences. Some, you know, are fortunate and some are less fortunate. And even right and wrong are sort of beyond our control. And sometimes we don't know they're right or wrong. Now, I don't mean right or bad. Wrong, you can do wrong with the best desire in your heart. To make a mistake is not necessarily a sin. To willingly choose something that you know you shouldn't do, like, you know, taking advantage of someone, we do know is bad. So it said, you know, that also that the pain I was feeling in doing this was far less than the pain of actually making the choice one day. And that, you know, it said there are chains of gold and chains of iron, and they weigh heavily.
Yeah. I love the statement in your book. As a matter of fact, I wrote it down and I've just been leaning into it, right? It's a statement that says something like your destiny is resetting itself around what you have removed.
Yeah,
Your
that's
destiny is
exactly
resetting.
right.
I mean, you should have seen me today. Your
Mm.
destiny is resetting yourself around what you have removed. Your destiny. I mean, you should have been in my room.
Your
You don't
destiny is
lock me
resetting
up.
itself around futures that are not meant to be.
Exactly. And it was so powerful because I think for somebody like me, because I think my brain works like that,
Mm.
but it's also such a freeing statement. And I wonder if when you heard that, did you have a sense of freedom or did something else happen? Because that's just one part of your book. I mean, this goes on to really talk about some profound things,
It
right?
does.
But I love the one, you're not here to feel good, okay? That's
Yeah,
you're
because
like,
I said,
let's
where
just
are the
be
gears
real
that feel
clear.
good? It said, you're
Yeah,
not here to feel
I know.
good.
Look at us. We want to go for the pleasure, right?
Well, like I said, let's compare it to many other NDEs in which
Yeah.
kind of polar opposite. Luckily, it's not like I was angry or scared or anything like that. That's, for example, I said something. I said, where am I? Where is this? And I said, you're in the in-between. I said, in between
Oh.
what? It said, everything. He said, you're
Yes.
standing inside the eternity of a single moment. And I said something like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And
Right.
it said, for example, do you remember the body? Do you remember the world to which your body belongs?
Right.
And I tell you right now, I struggled. And I said, no. If someone had come up to me and said, if you stay here longer, you can't go back, I'd say, go back where? To your family. What family, or what is a family? I had no concept of even being Jim. I was just a conscious being. And it said, then you see the truth and how the past is dust. And so as I moved through this process, every time the gears recalibrated and stopped, I'd reach around and try to find another one that, by hurting me, I knew to remove it. I saw this growing pile of gears, and I said, does this mean I'm going to live shorter? And it said, your number of breaths are already counted. I will worry about your last one. And then I said, again, I feel ashamed that I have no better moral compass than pain. It's not like I have a mantra or a guru or something to focus on. And it said, for those who make poor use of choices,
Yes.
offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Wow. Dr. Pat, I want to get your take on pain as the moral compass, because I have my one of my interpretations of it, but as a psychologist, how does that resonate with you?
I think for me, I like to think about it from a very human spiritual perspective, because if we remove our pain, what's left? And that's the question to ask. It's not that I am my pain. I'm not saying I am my pain. When you get to the point when you become your pain, that becomes, you've lost your sense of self, right? And so when I think about it, especially when I work with people, and I work with a lot of really cool athletes, and I don't know if you ever worked with men athletes, and Harley Davidson riders. The one thing you learn when you ride a Harley, I don't care who you are, what you do, and I've ridden with groups of men and women, you do not want to be the first one that says, I got to get off, my butt hurts. That you don't want to say. And there's a reason for it, but that doesn't mean you're not in pain of it. And so I think sometimes when we talk about pain, we have such an objectival we don't know how to not frame it in reference to something really bad, right? We just glom on, my mom committed suicide. My mom did commit suicide when I was 6. But when people talk to me about it, now I look at it and say, you know what? My mom did do that. She taught me how to love, but guess what happened? She served a purpose in my life, and then I got my stepmom. And if I didn't get my stepmom, I would still be homeless in New York City, because there are ways to look at it. Doesn't mean we don't feel anything, but the quote that you had in your book about pain,
Mhm.
right? And the way that you've seemed to take it in also talks about the choices we make, and the choices that will either give us more possibilities or fewer possibilities. I
Hmm.
mean, there's so much that is said here and so much that you've shared, right? And the line that I want to hold on to when it comes to pain is this other line in the book. It's something like you can't change the past. Just regurgitate the serenity prayer right there. You can't change the past, but you can make better choices in the future. Everything is interconnected, and pay more attention to your relationships. Be gentle with everyone as I am with you. And so what that talks to me, it talks about pain and what pain becomes sort of the guidepost, the GPS system. And that's what I get when I think about what you talk about in the book. I don't think that this conversation is telling you to become your pain.
No. In
It's
fact,
also not telling you to ignore it either. I mean, you and I, we'd love to have the good gears that make
Yeah.
us feel good, right?
Oh, yeah.
but you're right, and it's interesting too, because I mean, you've touched on so many points that grew into my second book, and about, you know, the sine wave of joy, sorrow,
Yeah.
joy, sorrow, and yet you had the main axis running down the middle of acquiescence, and that is the middle path, and
You
that is
know,
the path we should pursue.
in following up with Dr. Pat said, when I was reading your book, talking about not letting the pain define you.
Mhm.
It's like when you're sad, or if you're feeling, you say, don't say I'm sad, say I feel sad. So
Right.
you don't want to merge with your pain, because if you say I'm sad, you're programming yourself to be a sad person.
Right.
Everybody has blue periods where they feel sad. And that may sound at first blush simplistic, but it is not. It's a very, very deep thing. And what I really found fascinating, both your books are great, the In Between, and then the second book, The Practice In Between. But in the practice in between, there was so much of this that resonated with my studies of Zen Buddhism. And it's fascinating because in so many of the NDEs, people come back with philosophical and enlightened messages. And when you get to the real core of like the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of Buddha, they're very similar in this. It is in the letting go that we obtain. And it seemed like this profound NDE that you had. See, you just didn't have the, oh, I saw my Aunt Martha on the other side and she said, it's not your time and I have to go back. And I'm not downplaying those, because that's incredible as it is.
Sure.
But your NDE appeared to be designed by the in-between, by the powers that be, for you to bring back this almost Buddhist philosophy. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. I have found, I mean, at first I was, well, I mean, I've always had a Eastern orientation, if you will, but it totally makes sense. And especially because, let's face it, so much of the most profound truths are woven with ambiguity. Read the Tao Te Ching, right? How ambiguous. I mean, it's like a bunch of fortune cookie sayings put together.
Totally.
You know? And like in so many Zen koans, most people walk away scratching their heads. And no shame in that. I mean, we all have to start where we are and go to where we're going and cross that chasm. So yeah, I mean, it really does relate, everything you're saying about that. The more Buddhist, the more surrender. But to your point as well, one of my favorite sayings in the Bible always has been, be still and know that I am God.
Exactly.
And when I was reading that, it said the real translation is much closer. And I wasn't looking at a book about this. It just happened to be, a scholarly site. Said that the more accurate translation is let go and know that I am God.
Yeah.
And I just
The Aramaic, right? The different translation to it.
Yeah.
And yet let go and know. Let go and know. See, let's just play with that for a minute, because you go on to talk about this in your book. You go on to talk about the reality of possibilities, especially in spiritual studies, that if we can have that space of let go and know, right? Let go and know that I'm gone. That is the place of possibilities. That is the place where we receive information, whether you've had a near-death experience or not. It is the space where time stands still. And you might get a glimpse if we follow you along in the book, especially in some of the practices you talk about, where we will get information.
Yes.
Now, I say information, nobody ever told me. I get images. But if we get them, our culture wants us to believe, not every culture, that they are scary, that they're not true, that if you hear a message or you get something like that, what gives you the right to know it? I'd like to take a short break. When we come back, I would love to hear what happened on your journey to becoming you in the world where you're speaking outward and openly about this. Because there are just some things sometimes that you share, even with your closest friends, that makes them never call you again.
Had that experience.
Let's take a short break. But before we do, Jim, how do people get a copy of the book? How do they find out about you? Let's give them some information if we could.
Sure. My website is inbetweenproductions.com, and that's productions plural, inbetweenproductions.com. Both my books are available on Amazon. Again, the In Between, A Trip of a Lifetime, and the practice In Between, The Art of Letting Go. And the audio versions, I narrated both my books.
I was just going to ask you that. When we come back, let's talk about how one shifts into courage as a life breath.
Very good. I know.
All right.
Perfect.
Let's do that. Jacob, take it away. We'll do a show about it.
Yeah.
Welcome back,
We should.
Welcome back. It is so great to have all of you tune us in, turn us on. Before we get rolling, because we're not going to take another break, Mark, how do people find out about you? How do they get your information? Why don't you give everybody a heads up on that?
Absolutely. My website is the same as my new book, afterlifefrequency.com. And I invite everyone to sign up for my newsletter so you'll know what's coming up. I've got 2 spirit communication events online coming up Sunday, February 13th and Saturday, February 19th. And you can find out about that by visiting my website's calendar of events at afterlifefrequency.com. So, Jim, we were talking about some pretty heavy duty stuff. And the thing about your NDE, you went into this realm, this in between. And from a quantum physics standpoint, it almost sounds like you went into the Higgs boson particle. In other words, you were in the energy that's in between everything. And I find that fascinating.
Well, it's true, because when I was told I was standing inside the eternity of a single moment, I came back and looked up Planck time, which is 10 to the minus 44 seconds. One is 100 millionth of 100 millionth of 100 millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth or whatever of a second.
Yeah, I know. When you start, it's just like
yeah. And then also, and when I was told it was, why was it called the impossible now? Because that's where I was told I was. It said because it's impossibly thin, but it's impossibly wide across universes. And then you come back and you start reading up on this a bit more, and you find out that over at CERN, the particle accelerator in Switzerland, where said they took 2 entangled radioactive particles, so they know what their decay rate should be, and even though they're separated, their decay rate should always be synced.
Right.
And what they did is they put one into the particle accelerator and accelerated it up near the speed of light, which changed its time frame reference to its entangled mate. And they knew that when they brought it back, and they saw how out of phase they were. And they said, based on this could be a true statement that at the beginning of time, there is one particle, and at the end of time, there is its entangled mate. And if you were to change one right at the beginning of time, the one at end of time would change in sync with that, which means that to them there is no time, and that everything within right now, the current 14 billion years old of the universe, is in the now, is at the present. Time is just an illusion.
I write about that in my book, The Afterlife Frequency, like you write about that in your book. And it's interesting because when people have these in-depth spiritual experiences and you get beyond our finite perceptions, we get into this timelessness.
Yes.
And it is really fascinating. And it's funny when you're saying, when you're doing the math, and it's this to the, like I was studying how gravitational waves hit Earth in 2016, and they tracked it to these two black holes that collided 1.8 billion years ago. So I was trying to figure out, well, how far is that? Because a light year, which is the distance light travels in a year, is roughly 5.3 trillion miles. So try to multiply 5.3 trillion by 1.8 billion. And my computer said, they gave a number, and it said something to the to 10 to the 21st power, which means that 21 zeros. And I'm like, okay.
That's a big number. Just count them, every one of them. No,
Herbert Benson would say in one of his pivotal books on meditation, one of the first books ever to come out that anybody ever read, said that what you just described equals the number of connections in the brain that we have. That if you put a sheet of paper on a table and you piled it up past the moon, past all the planets, past our galaxy, 16 billion light years away, that's what's up here, you know. And I was really struck by two things that brought me to the place of a consciousness question for you. Because when I think about the science of this, I'm really struck by some of the other things that you grabbed onto. There's something in here where you wrote, and I sent this to my team, by the way. I sent this to my sales team.
Wow.
When you live life as a question, you no longer seek answers. You seek awakening. And you went on then to explain it further. And I love what you said about synchronicities and the role they play. Because my question to you is, when you have an experience like this, my words were, I'm different. That was the only thing I could say. I'm different. Doesn't explain anything, but the way you explain this is you talk about this idea that the synchronicity we're understanding is always beyond your grasp, but they're calling to you.
Yes.
What called to you after that? See, I know it's great for you and I to be sitting here chatting, but you were somebody before this and then somebody after it.
Jim 1.0 and Jim 2.0.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. And probably going to 3.0, 4.0, 5.0, because see, this is under your belt now, right?
Well, that's the integration process. And that's what, I mean, let's face it, after you're an NDE, it's all about the integration process. Every book you write after an NDE is basically you're living your integration out loud. You're asking different questions. You have different values. Different people resonate with you with no more effort than two tuning forks. You just feel this way and you respond this way. As far as what was calling to me or how I was feeling called, it's interesting. Again, part of that letting go means you are reacting to everything internally and externally in a different way. I'll be honest, when I went to marriage therapy to try to save my marriage, because 78% of NDErs get divorced, right? I mean, where'd my spouse go? At one point, I just looked over there and said, our marriage vows say till death do us part. What happens when one of us dies? No matter that we return. Our covenant is broken, and the only reason we stay together now is because we choose to. That truth was not well received. but it was the truth as I saw it. So what made me say that? I don't know. It just all of a sudden it was there. So it's interesting when we talk about what calls. I think what calls is the same thing as when you hear a truth and it does resonate with you, but it's just out of your grasp to fully wrap your head around it. So what you do is you continue to chew on it over the following days. That means you're starting to use it as a filter to see and experience life through. And so now every word, every thought, every action is being tailored towards that truth's summation, because you're walking the path of that truth. Because you're saying, I wonder, I'm going to see everyday life now. I'm going to see my job, my relationships, whatever I'm doing through that lens, and see, does that add meaning to it? And it does. And so what happens is that is the call. The call is to discover. The call is to be curious. The call is to be open. And somewhere in this process, we awaken to that question. And then the answer is irrelevant.
It is. And I want to just comment on this, and Mark, you too. Thank you put Maslow in your book. Yay.
Yeah. It was a good fit, right?
It was good. Because my experience of what you just said, and if you really play this out and talk to people, you are different. And that difference, right, that you may not be able to articulate to a spouse, a partner, a wife, a best friend, I don't care, your pastor, rabbi, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
Is never going to make sense to them. But what you start to do is behave in a certain way, right? For example, the 10 years you went to school for a doctorate to become a high-paid consultant, and you won awards for your research, you can't even stand to talk about it anymore. You turned down 5 jobs, and people just want to take you to therapist after therapist. How did you find the words? I think you were given the words, though. That was pretty good. I was given that picture. So it took me a long time with that picture. But
I hear you.
Given some words, right?
I'll be honest. I don't remember writing my second book. And
that's what I wanted to hear.
I wrote it in 1 month. And it was about a year ago. It was like in February or so. And I don't remember. So I was actually concerned that when we would be talking about it tonight, it's like, you're going to ask me, I don't remember. So I have my notes prepared to refer to as launch points, as springboards, because I can still take a thought from it and follow it. But if you were to say, well, what did you mean by, chapter 5? I said, I don't even know what chapter 5 was. but it's interesting that, and I would really like to cite this, that part of this not being in control, or the need to be in control of these things, was early one morning. I didn't sleep very well all night long. I never got past stage 1. And around 3 or 4 in the morning, suddenly it's like my mind saw these pages suspended in air in front of me in a nice even matrix. And when I looked at the pages, I could see words on them, and the words were out of focus. And I understood, oh, this is my second book. And I realized the reason I can't see the words is because that would be cheating, since I hadn't written it yet. But what happened is then, and this is the second time I've had someone come in and give me a lesson, if you will, on linear and nonlinear thinking. So what happens is it shows me things in the familiar, the linear, seeing the words. And then it starts flipping my mind back and forth kind of rapidly between linear and nonlinear perception. I don't know why it needs to happen like that. Maybe it's making it one, I don't know. But when it went into the nonlinear, I saw the rivers of white between the words, and then back to the words and the rivers of white. And then I was told, basically, use this as the blueprint to write your book. And I thought, well, what is that?
Yeah.
I thought, did it mean like the rivers of white form subconscious archetypal symbols that are going to open up our minds? I don't know. Later on, I realized, well, if I write a book and you're reading it, the words are me. The rivers of white are you. And the book is where we come together.
And when you were describing the linear versus nonlinear, something just dawned on me. It's like spirit communication. All right, here we are in this world, and all of a sudden now we're talking to this other dimension, which is not linear and which is timeless. And the in between is when you are in the zone in between, so that you're able to have a perspective of both. And that just hit me. And it's interesting because your NDE, you went into this realm where there was structures and technology, and you're a technical guy. So that is a more appropriate NDE for you than, Alice in Wonderland with unicorns and bunnies and that type of thing, because this is the profound message that needed to be presented in a way that Jim Bruton 2.0 would understand.
May I add and support that? Remember, I was saying I didn't have a life review, but to me, to like in the Christmas Carol with Scrooge getting his life review, and I understand how this might be very helpful for many people. And they've even said that they felt the impact of the choices they made in the past. Like if it caused someone pain, they felt that. Okay. However, for me, it's like, okay, sitting around feeling miserable about my past, there's no actionable intelligence here. The actionable intelligence is represented, just as you said, Dr. Pat, that it's not so much what happened in the past, but what can happen in the future. So how about we just cut loose of the past, because I was told the past is dust, be presented with the future choices, which are the fruit of those past choices, right? And now I can see the multiple and many choices I could make. And now I have a guide, as weird as it is, for how to make certain choices and how to avoid others. And that's why I say to me, it was kind of functionally, it was similar to a past life experience. I mean, to a life review, but it was actually something I could engage in, something I could say, now I can make some better choices right here, right now. That will, every day I'm living here, I can see how that better path is unfolding. And honestly, like you said, some people can't make that journey with you anymore. They may have been some of the gears I removed.
Exactly. I want to just leave you with this. There's a point in the book that will help a lot of people that have had an experience like yours. I related to this one part that you left us with in the book, and it explains to my team what's going on with me. And I love this, and I would challenge everybody to try this. There's a part in the book where you talk about to wait to the very last moment. I'm paraphrasing. To wait to the very last moment possible to make a decision, and to let all the possibilities play out as much as they can. Thank you for reframing what my team calls me procrastinating.
Would you, here's something I want to say. Today is January 27th. I wrote that exactly 1 year ago today.
I read that paragraph 5 times.
Synchronicity.
Thank you.
It is.
But I think it was what it describes for me, and thank you for joining us. Thank you both today. Is you were talking about an experience that many people have not gone through. My experience was much like yours. And so it was never really validated. But the way you write about it in your book explains a lot. Thank you for coming out and talking about it, because this is the kind of stuff that helps people that just don't think they're okay. Right, Mark?
Absolutely. And Jim, I'd like to invite you back sometime, because I think Dr. Pat and I just got started. So you have an open invitation to return to the show. And Dr. Pat and I will be back next week. I believe we have a call-in show next week, Dr. Pat. So we look forward to seeing and hearing from everyone again. Jim Bruton, thank you for being on the show. His website is inbetweenproductions.com. And I'm Mark Anthony, and this is Dr. Pat Baccili, and we are the Psychic and the Doc.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, thank you for tuning into The Psychic and the Doc with Mark Anthony and me, Dr. Pat Baccili, right here on transformationtalkradio.com. Hey, look, come back next week so we can explore with you more of life's many challenges and learn from fascinating guests. And you know what? Even Mark and me. We'll connect you and discover insights from people in this life and from the afterlife. Extraordinary problems? Yeah, they do. They require extraordinary solutions. But step into the world of possibilities with us on The Psychic and the Doc. That's every Thursday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, 7 p.m. Eastern time, right here on transformationtalkradio.com. That's transformationtalkradio.com. And don't forget, we're also live face-to-face on facebook.com, Transformation Talk Radio.